Hello, you're watching Live from Paris. I'm Belle Lupton. It's 11 p.m. here in the French capital. Let's get you up to date with our headlines. Campaigns ratchet up a notch in the UK a day ahead of the EU referendum. Opinion polls still showing both sides neck and neck. A U-turn from the French government, which now says a march against its controversial work reform bill can go ahead in Paris, despite security concerns. And the US joins its American neighbours to intervene in Venezuela's political crisis. But President Maduro says he's not about to call a referendum on his leadership. Thanks for being with us here on France 24. Now, when the British wake up tomorrow, the polls will be open in a referendum on their EU membership. The last 24 hours of campaigning have been frenzied, with each side trying to entice last-minute swing voters to their camps, as opinion polls show both sides pretty much neck and neck. The final TV debate is underway, although please don't switch over, with guests including politicians like far-right leader Nigel Farage, but also TV chefs and reality TV stars. Josh Vardy reports on the day's rallies.
Last day of campaigning in the UK for those for and against staying in Europe. This is the moment the leader of Nationalist Party UKIP has been waiting for. Nigel Farage has spent years campaigning for the country to leave the European Union and is already looking beyond the referendum.
We will still be members of the European Union on Friday morning, and we will have to enter into, relatively swiftly, a negotiation process that gets us out of political union but keeps us as good friends and trading neighbours.
Thursday's referendum pits those who argue the UK will be better off leaving the EU against those who say being a member brings huge benefits in terms of jobs, environmental protections and rights such as the freedom to live and work across the continent. Farage, along with fellow out-campaigners and prominent Conservatives Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, say that the country's sovereignty is under threat inside the European Union. They say this is the world's fifth largest economy and independent Britain will flourish. Few British and global institutions and experts agree with them. Neither does Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron.
Go out and vote Remain. Go out and vote Remain for a bigger, better Britain inside a reformed European Union. Stronger, safer, better off. A day to go. Let's do it.
Leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, has long been a Eurosceptic, but says he sees this referendum in domestic political terms.
It's a Tory-led Brexit campaign that is a real threat to working people in this country. So I say, we remain to fight.
If Britain votes to leave on Thursday, it will have a major impact on the EU. It will lose its second largest economy, one of its top military powers, and its richest financial centre.
Well, for more on this, let's speak to Dr. Lucy Hatton, who's in Coventry in the UK. She's a researcher at the University of Warwick, where her studies focus on issues of democracy in the European Union. Lucy, thank you very much for joining us. One of the criticisms levelled against the EU is that British voters don't vote for their MEP, their member of the European Parliament. Doesn't that pose a problem for the EU's democratic credentials?
It's definitely a problem in terms of, well, it's actually a misunderstanding of how the EU works and where the people who make the EU laws come from. So in the UK, as with every other EU member state, we directly elect our representatives to the European Parliament. Turnout in the UK might not be great. A lot of people might not go out to vote to elect their MEP, but they are given the opportunity to do so. And we're also represented in the EU in the lawmaking through our nationally elected governments who sit on the European Council, setting the direction of EU policy, and also on the Council of Ministers who have an equal say with the European Parliament in passing the laws. So that's one of the big misunderstandings of this whole debate, I think.
So does that mean that MEPs are, in one way or another, representative of the people in the countries that they are meant to be representing?
I would say so, yes. There might not be really close links between MEPs and the people who've elected them, because it is done on a regional basis rather than just a smaller constituency basis as we elect our Westminster MPs. So there might be a slightly looser link there, but we do have representatives that we can turn to voice our opinions, to try and get our voices heard in Brussels.
And another criticism that's been levelled against the EU, this one that the UK gives far too much money to the EU. One campaign poster for the Leave campaign saying that there are 1.7 million potholes in Wales, but your money is being spent on bridges like this, and it shows a picture of a bridge in Greece. Is that true? Is that something voters should be worried about?
I'm more worried about how the voters have simply taken some of the messages that they've received from the campaigns as fact. There have been a lot of surveys undertaken recently that have shown the common misconceptions and the extent of these misconceptions amongst the public. For example, recently a study found that 23% of the UK people who were interviewed thought that the UK was the top contributor to the EU's budget. It's not, it's actually the fourth biggest contributor. And also a majority of people thought that Greece, as in the example that you gave with the bridges, was the biggest receiver of funds from the EU budget, but it's not, it's actually the sixth. And I think this has been a real missed opportunity to really give the public some actual truthful information about what the EU is, how it's working, and what it does for us.
Lucy, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your analysis on that EU referendum. That was Dr. Lucy Hatton from the University of Warwick. Now, France's government has agreed to allow a march to go ahead tomorrow, Thursday, in Paris against its controversial labour reforms. The decision comes soon after a ban had been announced for security reasons. 2,000 police officers will be on call tomorrow, and 100 individuals have been forbidden from attending the march after last week demonstrations turned violent. Josh Vardy reports.
Banning a popular protest on the streets of Paris, a decision that dramatically backfired on the French government. Outcry followed the announcement that police chiefs had deemed the protest against labour reforms on Thursday enough of a security risk to forbid it from going ahead, suggesting a much smaller, static protest. A compromise was eventually reached with union chiefs on Wednesday morning.
The government took its desire to shut down the social movement to a new level by forbidding the Paris protest on the 23rd of June. After closed discussions with the Interior Minister, the unions have obtained the right to protest in Paris on the 23rd of June on a route proposed by the Interior Minister.
The labour reform protests come at a time while France is still under a state of emergency put in place following the terror attacks in November. Meanwhile, the country is also hosting the Euro football tournament, which has seen its own share of unrest. Authorities have voiced concerns that violence would break out as it had in previous marches, citing the 14th of June in particular.
Previous protests, specifically the one that took place on the 14th of June, saw an unacceptable level of violence. This protest led to buildings being damaged, as well as businesses, and 28 police were injured. A protest of the same nature cannot be allowed to happen.
A decision to forbid the protest outright would have been historical. The last time a union protest was banned in France was in 1962, at the end of the Algerian War.
To Venezuela now, where people have been collecting signatures this week to try and trigger a recall referendum on their president, Nicolas Maduro. Despite food riots earlier this month, dialogue between government and opposition has broken down. The US is the latest to try and bring the two sides together, as Fernand Vantets explains.
They show no signs of backing down. These Venezuelans want their president, Nicolas Maduro, gone. 2 million people have signed a petition for a recall referendum. The country is facing an economic crisis. Food shortages have sparked deadly protests and looting. The United States has joined international efforts to mediate a solution, dispatching a top diplomat to Caracas.
The United States joins with others in the international community in calling on the Venezuelan government to release political prisoners, to respect freedom of expression and assembly, to alleviate shortages of food and medicine, and to honor its own constitutional mechanisms, including a fair and timely recall referendum that is part of that constitutional process.
Maduro welcomed US involvement, but blamed the opposition for the lack of progress.
It is outrageous that dialogue is being rejected. Venezuela is demanding dialogue. I want dialogue. Do you know why? Because I want peace. I want to solve problems. I want the economy to recover.
The opposition is skeptical. The recall referendum is being challenged at every turn. They've approached the Organization of American States. On Thursday, the body will hold a special meeting to determine whether Venezuela is in violation of its democratic charter. This could eventually result in the country being kicked out of the OAS. Maduro's government is fighting hard to prevent such a political embarrassment, but that is unlikely to get food back on the shelves.
Now, the head of the UN Security Council has condemned North Korea after it carried out another test of its nuclear missile during the night. François Delattre of France called for a swift UN response after North Korea's most far-reaching test yet. Well, for more on this, let's take you live now to New York, where the UN headquarters are, and to Imoki Bebiak, a correspondent for German news agency DPA. She's standing by for us now. And Imoki, how has the UN reacted to this condemnation?
A spokesman for UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned the launch, calling it brazen and irresponsible. The United States and Japan called for an emergency meeting of the Security Council, which is set to begin in about an hour. The Council is expected to issue a statement condemning the launch. Under UN Security Council sanctions, North Korea is prohibited from using ballistic missile technology in order to prevent the country from developing nuclear technology. French Ambassador François Delattre said that the missile tests were a clear and unacceptable violation of UN Security Council sanctions.
And this isn't the first test we've seen from North Korea. Do you get the feeling they're ratcheting up their activity?
Yes, it definitely seems that North Korea has been conducting an increased number of tests since the beginning of this year. And in fact, the Security Council passed new sanctions in March in response to those tests. Since the new sanctions, the country has conducted at least 8 tests. Many of them have failed. And the tests have been met, in fact, with fierce condemnation from the international community.
Imoki Bebiak, thank you very much for that update from New York on those North Korean nuclear tests there. Well, let's give you a roundup of the day's Euro 2016 matches now with Ketivan Gorjestani. Hi, Ketivan. And the group stages have come to an end now. The last 2 teams to qualify for the last 16 are Belgium and the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, Belgium, who were presented as some of the favorites for this competition, struggling and qualifying just at the very last minute. They were facing Sweden in their final game. That was Group E. In the 62nd minute, Zlatan Ibrahimovic's goal was disallowed, even though the Swede was definitely not offside. And then Belgium pushing in the second half until Raja Nainggolan gave Belgium the winning goal in the 84th minute, sending the Swedes crashing out, which means this was the last time we were seeing Zlatan Ibrahimovic play under the Swedish jersey. That's because at the same time, Ireland beat Italy, who had fielded a B-side, having already qualified at the top of the group. So 1-0 for the Republic of Ireland, which means Belgium finish second in this Group E, and Ireland qualify as one of the best third-placed teams in these group stages. Now we're going to see what happened earlier today in Group F. There was a game between Hungary and Portugal. One of the most exciting games so far. 6 goals scored. Final score 3-3. Unfortunately, not enough for Portugal to finish as seconds. That's because in the other game, Iceland beat Austria 2-1 at the very last minute in the 94th minute. This means Hungary finished top of Group F ahead of Iceland on a goal difference. Portugal clinching that last 16 spot as also one of the 4 best third place team. Austria there are eliminated. And of course, in just half an hour, we'll have the full picture of these last 16. And the big clash that we already know will be Italy versus Spain. That will be a rematch of the 2012 Euro final.
Kitty Van, thank you for that. And I know you'll be coming back and telling us all the latest as and when it happens. Thank you. Kitty Van Gorgistani there with an update of the Euros. Now, they were centre stage at every Prince concert. Now, one of them could become the centrepiece to your home because one of the music legend's iconic Yellow Cloud electric guitars is going on auction in the US. Custom made for Prince, it comes with a letter of authenticity and a little repair to the neck, which was broken in France in 1994. One thing, though, you'll have to have at least $30,000 to be in with a chance. That's the opening bid. Now, for those Brits seeking a bit of an escape from all the EU referendum debate, Glastonbury has opened its gates. This may come as not much of a surprise, but opening night has been under a grey sky. Organisers had to ask drivers to delay their journeys due to the heavy traffic caused by incessant rain. But that hasn't stopped tens of thousands of partygoers from heading to the festival, where Adele, Coldplay and Muse will be performing over the weekend. Let's remind you of our headlines here on France 24. Campaigns ratchet up a notch in the UK a day ahead of the EU referendum. Opinion polls still showing both sides neck and neck. A U-turn from the French government, which now says a march against its controversial work reform bill can go ahead in Paris despite security concerns. And the US joins its American neighbours to intervene in Venezuela's political crisis. But President Maduro says he's not about to call a referendum on his leadership. Time for some business now, and Marcus Carlson's here. Hi, Marcus.
Hi there.
And let's start with the word